There's a living organism that costs 50 cents and keeps plants alive permanently, not temporarily, not with weekly feeding, but by creating a direct underground network that delivers water and nutrients straight to the roots with 1,000% more efficiency than any fertilizer on the shelf at your garden center. One application to the soil and your plants tap into a symbiotic system that has kept forests alive for 400 million years. The Versailles gardens in 17th century France relied on it entirely without a single bag of synthetic fertilizer. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, were built on this principle alone. Indigenous farmers across 5 continents have cultivated it for over 8,000 years. Without ever setting foot in a nursery, it forms a microscopic web that extends root systems by up to 1,000 times their natural reach and transfers phosphorus, nitrogen, zinc, and water directly into plant cells in exchange for sugars. The plant produces through photosynthesis, no chemical fertilizers, no pH test kits, no expensive potting mixes, no grow lights, 50 cents worth of spores mixed into your soil, and you tap into the same biological network that keeps a single oak tree alive for 300 years without anyone ever feeding it. Then someone in a corporate boardroom did the math. The global fertilizer industry generates over $230 billion a year. Plant food, growth boosters, root stimulators, soil amendments, and specialty fertilizers are the reason people return to garden centers every single spring. A 50-cent solution that eliminates fertilizer dependency permanently is not an innovation to celebrate. It is a revenue stream to destroy. They did not stop using it because it stopped working. They stopped teaching it because it worked too well and made their products unnecessary. This is the story of mycorrhizal fungi. The underground network that every forest on Earth runs on and every garden center has spent 70 years making sure you never understand. Welcome to Forbidden Camping. If these stories matter to you, the subscribe button is the only way to make sure this knowledge survives. Here we open the vaults. The agriculture industry locked shut. Now let me take you back to where this begins. 8,000 years before the first synthetic fertilizer was manufactured, farmers in the Fertile Crescent noticed something extraordinary. Wild plants growing in undisturbed soil beside their fields were healthier, greener, and more drought-resistant than the crops they were carefully watering and tending inside their gardens. Wheat growing at the edge of the forest stayed green through dry months, while irrigated crops and tilled fields turned yellow and wilted. Fruit trees that seeded themselves in the wild produced abundant harvests, while transplanted orchard trees struggled and required constant attention. The soil around these wild plants looked no different. It had no special color, no unusual texture, nothing visible that explained the dramatic difference in plant health, but something was living in that soil that changed everything. By 3000 BCE, Egyptian agricultural texts carved into temple walls at Karnak describe a practice called ground blessing, where farmers would collect soil from the base of healthy wild trees and mix it into the planting holes of new crops. They did not understand the microscopy, but they understood the results. Plants grown with this wild soil transfer thrived with half the water and produced double the yield. The Greeks called it earth blood. The Romans documented it as terra vita, living soil. And every farming culture from Mesoamerica to Southeast Asia had their own version of the same practice. The Mayans collected forest floor soil and mixed it with their maize plantings. Japanese farmers gathered soil from beneath pine trees before planting rice. West African agriculturalists transferred soil from wild yam patches to cultivated fields. Andean potato farmers in Peru mixed highland grassland soil into their terraces. This was not superstition. This was repeated observation across thousands of years and dozens of independent civilizations, all converging on the same biological truth. Something invisible in undisturbed soil makes plants nearly indestructible, and in 1885, a German biologist named Albert Bernhard Frank finally saw it under a microscope for the first time. He was studying the roots of forest trees and discovered something that shattered everything. Botanists thought they knew. The roots were not alone. Wrapped around every single root, hair was a microscopic network of fungal threads called hyphae, forming a structure Frank named mycorrhiza from the Greek words for fungus and root. These were not parasites, they were partners. The fungus extended out into the soil like a secondary root system hundreds of times. Larger and more efficient than the plant could ever grow on its own, the fungal threads could reach into tiny soil pores and extract phosphorus, nitrogen, and trace minerals that plant roots could never access. Then the fungus delivered those nutrients directly into the root cells in exchange for sugars and carbohydrates. The plant produced through photosynthesis. It was a trade agreement written into biology itself. The plant fed the fungus fed the plant, and together they survived conditions that would kill either organism alone. Frank published his findings in 1885 and documented that over 90% of all land plants on Earth form mycorrhizal relationships. 90%, that includes almost every vegetable you grow, every flower in your garden, every tree, every shrub, every herb, tomatoes, peppers, beans, lettuce, roses, marigolds, fruit trees, berry bushes, all of them evolved to depend on this fungal partnership. Without it, they do not die immediately, they just struggle. They yellow, they wilt, they become vulnerable to disease. They need constant fertilizer to replace what the fungus would have delivered naturally. And that is exactly what the agriculture industry realized in 1947. After World War II, chemical companies like Monsanto, DuPont, and IG Farben had a massive problem. They had built enormous factories to produce ammonium nitrate for explosives during the war. But when the war ended, they had production capacity for millions of tons of nitrogen compounds and no one to sell them to. So they rebranded them as fertilizer. The Green Revolution was not a humanitarian breakthrough. It was a logistics solution for surplus bomb material, and it worked brilliantly for corporate profits. Farmers who had relied on compost, crop rotation, and natural soil biology for 10,000 years were told their methods were primitive and inefficient. The new scientific approach was synthetic fertilizer, chemical pesticides, deep tilling, and monoculture planting. Yields increased dramatically in the first 5 years, which made the approach look like a miracle, but something invisible was dying in the soil. Mycorrhizal fungi cannot survive aggressive tilling because it shreds the high-fall network into fragments. They cannot survive high nitrogen fertilizer because the plant stops trading sugars with the fungus. When nitrogen is freely available in the soil, they cannot survive chemical pesticides and fungicides which kill soil life indiscriminately. Within a single generation of industrial farming practices, the fungal network that had sustained every major civilization in human history was gone from millions of acres of farmland. And then something predictable happened. The plants became fertilizer dependent. Without the fungal network to deliver nutrients, crops required constant synthetic inputs to survive. Without the drought resistance mycorrhizae provided irrigation, became mandatory. Without the disease protection the fungus offered, pesticide use skyrocketed. Every solution created a new dependency, and every dependency created a new product line. The global fertilizer market exploded from $8 billion in 1960 to over $230 billion today. The pesticide industry grew to $80 billion, the irrigation equipment industry became a $15 billion market, and home gardeners got pulled into the exact same cycle. You buy a tomato plant from a nursery that was grown in sterile potting mix with synthetic fertilizer. You plant it in your backyard soil that has been tilled, and I have spent months gathering suppressed agricultural techniques, forgotten soil science, and the methods that built civilizations. Before the fertilizer industry convinced you that growing food requires a chemistry degree, all of it is inside the complete forbidden camping vault. Now stay with me, because what comes next is the part the garden industry really does not want you to hear. The suppression was not dramatic, it was structural and institutional. By 1970, every major agriculture college in the United States had received significant research funding from chemical fertilizer manufacturers. The curriculum shifted from soil biology to soil chemistry, from ecosystem health to input management, from working with nature to controlling it. An entire generation of horticulturists graduated without a single lecture on mycorrhizal relationships. Garden centers started stocking products that actively killed the soil life their grandparents had cultivated. Potting soil was sterilized to create consistency and shelf stability, which killed every beneficial microbe. Fertilizers were formulated with high nitrogen concentrations that shut down mycorrhizal partnerships. Fungicides were recommended as preventative treatments that destroyed fungal networks indiscriminately. The average home gardener was now spending $120 per year on fertilizers and amendments to replace a biological function that nature provides for free. And here is the truly sinister part. The mycorrhizal fungi never went extinct. You can still buy it. But the garden industry made sure you would pay 50 to 100 times more than it costs to produce. Commercial mycorrhizal inoculant products sell for $25 to $60 per pound at garden centers. The active ingredient is fungal spores that reproduce exponentially the moment they contact a living root. Chemistry does not care about profit margins. Fungal networks do not expire, and nature has never charged a subscription fee. If this fault changed how you look at the yellow leaves on your tomato plant, the wilting basil in your garden bed, or the struggling fruit tree in your backyard, then subscribe and share this video now. Every single share puts a crack in the wall. They spent billions building around knowledge that belonged to your ancestors. Every subscription keeps this channel digging deeper into the vaults they thought were sealed forever. The next vault opens soon, and what is inside is the one forgotten food preservation method that keeps vegetables edible for 12 months without refrigeration and costs nothing but salt and time.